Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck tech video. Today I'm still catching up with a bunch of deck lists that I've been playing with for the past year or more since I've been gone off my channel. Here we have a newer deck, Greven, Greven Predator Captain. I do have another new deck built around the wall I'll be getting to shortly. Now this deck actually has existed for a while. This commander is slowly subjugating my Exava decklist. This was a Voltron decklist that I have thus transformed, or slowly been becoming more of a Greven decklist. So let's just get her out of the way for now. So keep in mind while watching this video, there's about 20 cards dedicated to a Voltron equipment setup. That's good on Menace 5/5 for 5 body, but of course it doesn't really do much else for the deck. So you may want to maybe consider altering or replacing the equipment if you like this style of deck. Now, Greven here is, again, a 5-mana, 5/5 menace. That's very good in Rakdos. We don't actually have very many good relevant attack size bodies. For example, Exava here is a 4-mana, 4/4 first strike that can't block. Not so good. But the menace body is very relevant. Oddly enough, he is a human warrior, and that kind of bugs me because if you know much about the lore, that's not exactly correct. But now he has two very fun upsides here. One being that he gets plus X and O into end of turn for the amount of life I've lost. This doesn't matter if it's my turn or the opponent's turn. For example, I could crack a fetch land on an opponent's turn and he could get +1 and O. The other ability here is when he is declared as an attacker, I may being very important, may sacrifice another creature and I draw per the creature's power and I lose life per the toughness, thus pumping him. Now that's a very interesting ability, and it does give all sorts of fun openings and ideas here. You could focus on the life loss and try to smash someone with paying your life. You can focus on creature effects that you want to go to the graveyard since you have a sacrifice outlet. I will say straight up, the worst part about this commander is building around trying to optimize this last paragraph, because he is required to go to combat. You have to declare him as an attacker and you have to have another creature in play to use this ability. That's why this deck has remained a somewhat Voltron equipment based deck, because Greven will all too frequently just get destroyed or you will not have anything to sacrifice. Now I've added a few cards to counteract this, but again, in a stronger, not competitive environment, but a stronger environment, a commander that requires to enter the combat step and be declared as an attacker, that's a hindrance. And his upside is very powerful, but that is a very, very hard thing to work with sometimes. Now let's stick him up here. I will go through this deck in card type order, like creatures and spells and artifacts, and I will point out the value cards that work very well with him. The most relevant card recently, I've got a nice set of these before the price really spiked, is a nice little 2-mana ritual. This comes out usually mid to late game and generates an infinite amount of mana. You typically want to hold on to this for post board wipe. The issue with a lot of Voltron decks is your mana ramp and accelerant is set up to cast maybe one card a turn until you can cast 2 equipments later, or removal spell plus equipment. So once you get blown out, it's a little difficult to recover if you don't have a lot of mana. Something like this is great because you can land it, get a lot of mana, enough to hopefully cast your commander or a creature and an equipment, and hopefully get back in the game. We have Combat Celebrant. This is very good with Greven. You will see a lot of trending creatures that have a very high power and a low toughness, so you draw more cards and you lose less life. Sometimes you want to lose more life for this ability, but this specifically is interesting with Greven because you can enter the combat step with this card, both of them, and both of them will go on the stack at the same time, so you can get your extra combat, and then you can untap him, and then you can sack this to Greven. It's just interesting that you have to keep in mind that things like that will utilize the stack at the same time when things are declared as attackers. We have Mind Slicer. This is fun with Greven because you can sack him after he's declared as an attacker and make your opponents lose their hand. This is, of course, a Miser card. Some of your opponents really don't like seeing this. We have Gonti, kind of the reverse. We're only going to draw 2 cards, but it is a nice value engine, and Death Touch is a good thing to put with equipment. People don't always want to block it. We have Flame Tongue Kavu, again, higher power than toughness. A nice entry to remove some kind of blocker and a nice thing to sacrifice later. We have Solemn for generic value. We have my 2 favorites here. I love Torchling, I love Arcade Post artwork, and we have the new Endling as well. The Undying is very cute. But these are also very fun, specifically with Greven here, because you can use the plus or minus to gauge how much you draw or life loss or how much pump is here. These cards give a lot of somewhat creature control when it comes to combat. It's very interesting. And my favorite part about Torchling is people tend to forget the forced block effect there. That's really great. Now, this deck does run a Yargle because drawing 9 cards off of 5 mana is fantastic. We have a Puppeteer Click, which is great to sacrifice to Greven because the Persist will come back. It will give us fodder. If we don't want to sack this to Greven, we can just sack the thing that it pulls back, because this only exiles at end of turn. If you sack the thing, this thing reanimates, it's going to go back to the graveyard, so you can try to snag it later. We have Doom Whisperer. This is one of the scarier threats with Greven. This is an infinite ability to pay life. You can use this to immediately pump your commander to lethal after no blocks in combat. Of course, you have to be careful because people have instant speed removal after you pay all that life. That is a part, again, where you can consider this a Suicide Black deck or Rakdos deck. You're literally going all in trying to kill somebody. But this is actually a very good follow-up. Both of these are 5 mana. Sometimes you don't want to plug Greven out there, and this is just a great flying body to hit people in the face with equipment. We have Phyrexian Delver, another way of losing a lot of life. This is great to play if Greven's been out for a turn. You can then on your next turn cast this, reanimate something, pump him real big, and then get some nonsense to sacrifice. We have Noxious Gearhawk. There's not a lot of ways to gain a lot of life in this deck, which is a bit of an issue, but I've actually enjoyed this deck as more of a suicide run, really. But this is a great way of removing a blocker, gaining life, a little bit of stability in the game. To go with the Gearhawk, because I'm a completionist, we have the other Gearhawk to draw some cards or mill some. We have a Godo because we have a lot of equipment in the deck. This typically goes and gets a Haste Enabler or Feast and Famine. Those are the 2 default grabs. We have Kokosho. This is, again, one of the few ways of gaining life. It's very good with Greven. It doesn't matter if you lose the life and you gain it back immediately with this. He counts how much you've lost during the entire turn cycle. So yeah, you could lose 5 life to Greven by sacking this and then gain 30, whatever, or 15, however many opponents you got. He doesn't care about the amount of life you've gained. Even if you end up with more than you started with, you've already lost 5 life. That's what he cares about. We have Molten Primordial. One of my favorite things to do in any deck that has red is to play Active Treason effects. It's just threatened effects have classically been one of my favorite effects in this game. And stealing your opponent's creatures to sacrifice with your commander is fun. And of course, again, as a completionist, because I'm running 1 Primordial, I might as well run both. I always advocate this card in non-competitive groups. This is a single card that you want to hold in your hand until after a board wipe, because this one card tends to generate a board presence out of nowhere. So don't rush this out. Let's go on to the spells. You will start seeing the trend of the deck of paying a lot of life because that's fun. Ways of literally just paying your life into causing him to pump. This could give your commander +4 no power until turn while removing a blocker. And Menace means your opponents only have to have 1 blocker up, and then you can still get through. Paying 5 life to get rid of 2 is very good. Exiling cards, that's also very good. Snuff Out is typically free. You sometimes even want to pay it for free, even if you have the mana open, because paying 4 life is fantastic. Toxic Deluge is fantastic. While you are shrinking his power and toughness down, you're still gaining him a bit of power there. But even better, probably the best card in this deck is Fire Covenant. You can use this to just wipe all the creatures out, and it's instant speed, so you can even do this after no blocks are declared or whatever, and just trash everybody. And that's usually enough to pump him to lethal. Cards like Hatred, the original Greven artwork from Commander Greven, from Tempest, whatever, that's not in the deck. It's actually not good enough because there's not enough lifelink support in the deck to support that kind of card. While it is like a discount, you only have to pay half of your life into Hatred for this. That is just basically like a brute strength or a giant growth effect, while you can find other cards in the deck to pay your life and have other effects at the same time. Decree is another board wipe. This is just another way of drawing a bunch of cards. But we also have 2 combat tricks. He tends to get really big really fast. If you even just lose 2 life on your turn and he attacks for 7 and you have an extra combat or double strike extra combat, then you start killing more than 1 opponent on a turn. The problem with Seize the Day in a Voltron deck that runs equipment is this targets the creature. So if you have like the Sword of War and Peace on Greven, you cannot use this spell. But this is also a fun thing to just mill over with the Faithless Looting early and flash it back when your opponents forget you have it. Savage Beating does not target your creatures, but this does give double strike and a potential double combat or both, and this tends to end games. Now, as I said, I love playing these effects. Normally, these are very suboptimal effects to play in Commander, but they are sometimes very swingy. But when your Commander has the ability to sacrifice your opponent's creatures built-in for card advantage at the same time, that's gravy. So that means that I'm actually running 3 of these. My favorite being, well, my Threaten and Disharmony are the original ones. Disharmony is from Legends, Threaten's from, I think, Onslaught. Act of Treason is just a more generic one. There's actually strictly better versions of Act of Treason now, but I have a stack of these. But I love the instant speed ones. Instant speed Act of Treason effects mean you can pull your opponent's creatures out of combat or someone else's creature and block an opponent's creature, essentially using this as a 2-for-1 effect. This has the upside of Phyrexian mana, so this could also pump Greven for 4 power. We have Word of Seizing, does the same thing as Act of Aggression, but this also takes any permanent. You could take an opponent's Planeswalker and ultimate that Planeswalker. You could take someone's Mirrored Landscape or Wasteland if it's tapped and try to take advantage of that. We do have Reanimate. This is another way of massively boosting Greven's power. You can usually use this on anybody's creature and just make this a 2-shot kill, or if you hit someone already, you can usually 1-shot them with this. Very, very powerful 1-mana card. If you play Greven, this is necessary. We have Vampiric Tutor, a little 2-mana, or 1-mana, 2-life loss, sometimes relevant. Basically, this and Demonic Tutor just set up there to get equipment that's relevant, or hopefully get a card that we need to get into the game with. We have a slight reanimation package here, so we have a Faithless Looting. More recently, Faithless Looting has been banned in Modern, so I've had 2 foil play sets of Faithless Looting to shove into all my decks with red. We have Night's Whisper and Sign in Blood, Read the Bones, and Moonlight Bargain. All of these cards pay life to draw cards, which mean they pump our commander. That's why I'm saying, like, you don't want to play something that just sinks your life, like Hatred, if it does nothing else. But these 4 cards are all fantastic on their own, and they all have the upside of also pumping Greven if he's in play. I will always rant and rave and suggest Moonlight Bargain to any deck with black. It's an instant speed draw. You could pay 5 life or 10 life and draw 5 cards. You can do this at the end of an opponent's turn. If you're playing black, you probably already have reanimation shenanigans in the deck. So it's just a good end of turn trick to set up for your future turn. But this also could pump him up to 15 power all on its own. Let's go on through the other permanents. Now, as I said, this is a Voltron deck with some equipment. There's, of course, a Feast and Famine, so we have a potential combo with an Aggravated Assault and sort of Feast and Famine. Not a big fan of this combo. It's in here just because I happen to have this shiny enchantment and I don't want to get rid of it. We do have Greed. This is very fun, again, with Greven. You may even want to consider, if your meta is more battle cruiser and late gamey, replace the equipment with, like, Erebos, the God of the Dead. Because it's the same thing as Greed, just a little bit more mana. But you can pay a black, and every black you pay, you're giving your commander +2/0, but you're paying a life at the same time. But you're drawing cards at the same time. It's all upside. And my Planeswalker for the deck is the one that can Act of Treason. Making opponents discard and lose life is great. Don't really care about the ultimate. This is mainly here because the middle ability will give the option of stealing opponent's creatures to sacrifice to our commander. Let's go through now the artifacts. We will save the equipment for last, but let's go through the small ramp package we have here. We have a black-red deck, so the best we can do is try to land ramp so our artifacts don't always get blown up, but yeah. We have the Soul Ring and a Mind Stone, a Charcoal Diamond, a Fire Diamond, Thought Vessel, because this deck does tend to draw a lot of cards, a Talisman, Rakdos Signet, and a Felwar Stone. One of my other deck lists I've already recorded. I think it's the Judith one, has an extra Mana Crypt. Voltron decks really do need their commander to come out much, much quicker. If you want this deck to be successful with equipment, then you may actually need to invest in like a Mana Vault and a Mana Crypt, because if your commander is not out and attacking by turn 3 or 4, then your deck's probably going to fall behind to whatever the enter the battlefield green ramp decks are doing. Or maybe that's just my meta. Let's go through the equipment next. I think there's 12 equipment in the deck. My normal formula for Voltron and Commander, especially in 1v1 decks, is a 4 mana or less commander with haste or evasion of some kind. That way that you have all these 2 mana rocks that you cast on turn 2. And then you have a turn 3 commander. And if you have consistent land drops, you have 5 mana on turn 4, so you can cast and equip a sort of relevant value. This is different. Our commander now is 5 mana. Our deck is not focused around equipment anymore. We only have 12 equipment, and we have more shenanigans and life loss effects going on here. So ignore my normal formula. If you're a fan of my channel, you know what I'm talking about. Don't worry about it here. We have the boots. We have 2 haste enablers, and these are great. People love killing Greven, especially after you sink like 10 life into your combat step or something like that. Boots on him for protection are very good. We have Sword of the Animus. This is one of the better cards in this type of deck. There's only like, I think 12 basics in the deck, but even just shoving this out on any door creature and spending the first few turns attacking and land ramping will actually get you further in the game than trying to get your commander out and chipping damage on somebody. We have Shitty Jitty. I love just the antics that this card can play, especially when you put this on a bright or a torchling or something like that. And then we have the Swords of Relevant Value. We have, again, I'm a bit of an OCD completionist. Not all of the swords are actually good and playable in EDH, but I have every one in this deck. Mainly just for the color protection. The relevant ones are Light and Shadow because it gives you pro swords and path, untapping your lands, and drawing cards. Those are by far the 3 most important swords. If you want any equipment in your deck, these would be the 3 to get if you plan on attacking. But we have other ones. War and Peace is a way of gaining life. We may have a very large amount of cards in our hand, and this will immediately typically offset Greven sacking something like Yargle. But this also tends to do a lot of damage to one player. Body and Mind it used to be the worst, but recently there's a new sword that I think is just worse than this. This creates extra tokens, which we can sack to Greven. Does make us somewhat immune to like Grave Pact effects. Not really. But it's no longer the worst sword. We have Sword of Sinew and Steel. I have a bit of a sadness here. As a Rakdos fanboy, I was hoping this would be a little bit better. I understand from the article that I've read that they couldn't make it too good because these are the 2 colors of removal. So they couldn't make it oppressively good. But I mean, we are in a world where untapping your lands from an equipment exists and drawing cards and burning from equipment exists. So I feel like this was severely neutered too far. And the new worse sword, at least in this deck, is Proliferating. This literally just gives our commander +2 power every turn. You can barter with opponents in multiplayer, giving counters to like a storage land or a planeswalker, or helping an Atraxa player jumpstart. That's really where the sword belongs, is in Atraxa. This is terrible. I mean, it does make it so that people can't target, bounce, or path your commander. So realistically, the protection is the reason to run this sword. We do have a Batterskull. Another equipment that may end up being in here, I may actually end up replacing... Oh, I just kicked the table. I may end up replacing the Shitty Jitty, Uma's always Jit, with Loxodon Warhammer, because Trample's relevant and Lifelink is relevant. This right here is really good because you can use the token and sack it to draw off of Greven. It lasts no effect even though the token's a 0/0. You will still draw 4 and lose 4. But giving Greven Lifelink and Vigilance is also very good. Let's go through the lands next. There are 38 lands in the deck. If I had a more quick mana, like Mana Crypt, Mana Vault effects, then I would definitely drop this to 36 or so. But we have the color fixable ones. We have a few come into play tap ones. You will see these lands are more budget than most of my Rakdos decks. It's because I think I have 12 active Rakdos EDH decks right now, like black-red ones. So these are not exactly glamorous, but they are good utility. Like we have fetchable ones, but I don't have a Bloodstained Mire in here. We have just as many untapped lands as possible. I really don't like running bounce lands. I just happen to have one sitting around while filling out this deck. We do have a random shock in here. This is another fun card. These are generally used just for colorless. This is good if your deck is equipment. Because again, remember, this used to be a deck that had 12 mana rocks, 20 equipment, 20 creatures. So this typically just tap for colorless. This probably needs to be replaced with another dual land. But obviously it's just typically a colorless source. We have a tap land. This is very good in any deck that has a Sword of Feast and Famine. Because after you get blown out, people tend to forget you have a creature land. And if you sandbag the Feast and Famine, or especially after like a Cyclonic Rift, you can just cast and equip the Feast and Famine to this and go and untap your lands, which untaps this, essentially giving you double mana for the turn. We have a Reflecting Pool for more untapped mana. We have Graven Cairns, a Foreboding Ruins, which is hot garbage. Don't run that. We have the 2 actually relevant legendary lands here. These are great. I usually run these in decks, all of my Rakdos decks, just because you can do political games, because you can target your opponent's legends and barter with them. But they're actually very good here because you can give him Menace and Fear and First Strike, all very good powers. This is giving him First Strike on the opponent's turn is good, keeping him as a blocker, because you can typically use instant speed pumps to pump his power and take down what opponents think are bigger creatures than yours. Then we have 2 more legendary lands. These are here because I have a slight OCD completionist issue. These have very rarely ever been used. You can remove someone's Swamp Walk or First Strike or land walking ability. But they're untapped lands, which is relevant. We have 2 little cheap fetches, a Bazooka Bog, and there's a Scavenger Grounds in here somewhere. These are a little bit of graveyard hate. It's always good to have a small amount of graveyard hate in all of your decks, even if they're tucked away in the lands. Rogue's Passage goes with just about any Voltron-style deck. If you really don't want your commander to die in combat from bigger creatures, if you just need to get through a wall of tokens. Ancient Tomb is online with what you really need a Voltron deck to do. Quick mana to help get you out faster to go along with like the Mana Crypt, Mana Vault starts. And we have a Field of Ruin for little mana 8. And I believe there are 6 of each basic. So yeah, 38 lands. So yeah, that is my current Greven deck list. Keep in mind, if you are interested in a pure Life Matters type of deck, you can do things where you switch life totals after you pay all sorts of life. You can put more lifelink gear in here. Realistically, you may want to switch out equipment for like the spells that give your commander undying, like an instant speed recursion, because Voltron decks are very vulnerable in multiplayer. They're very hard to deal with 3 to 4, more than one opponent, really. You can very easily just kill one player out of nowhere with Greven, which most people realize after one single game. So he tends to get removed a lot. So my best recommendation if you're playing Greven is to have a nice complement of semi-aggressive and threatening creatures on their own, so you don't have to use just Greven. The equipment package is staying in the deck because I'm technically still going to keep this as an Exava deck in the background, just for my complete set of legends. But I'm going to focus more on Greven because it is just a strictly better commander. But yeah, if you have any feedback or ideas, definitely let me know. Thanks.